War begins not always with explosions, but with decisions made in silence. In 1939, Europe collapsed once again into conflict. Nations mobilized armies, fleets, and weapons. But among the countless soldiers marching to the front, a single man carried no gun, no uniform, and yet would help change the course of the war. His name was Juan Pujol García. To British intelligence, he would later be known as Agent Garbo, a man who fought with deception, not violence. Juan Pujol García was born in Barcelona in 1912, the son of a small factory owner. He grew up in a divided Spain in a time when politics could turn neighbor against neighbor. When the Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936, Pujol was 24 years old. He saw the brutality of both sides and the executions, the propaganda, the betrayal of ideals. He served briefly but left disillusioned. He came out of that war with a deep hatred of tyranny in every form, fascist or communist, and a conviction that truth was fragile. When the Second World War began, Spain was officially neutral under Franco, but its people were scarred and cautious. Pujol, though a civilian, could not remain still. He decided to help Britain fight Nazi Germany. He had no training, no contacts, no resources, only determination. In 1940, he went to the British embassy in Madrid and offered to spy for them. The British officials refused. They saw only an inexperienced Spaniard with broken English and no apparent usefulness. He returned twice more and was rejected twice again. But Pujol did not give up. If the British would not employ him, he would become a spy on his own. He forged documents claiming he was a loyal supporter of Nazi Germany. Then he approached the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service. He told them he wanted to work for the Reich inside Britain. They accepted him, believing they had recruited a devoted agent. They gave him invisible ink, a code, and money to travel to London. But Pujol never left the Iberian Peninsula. He set up his base in Lisbon, Portugal, close enough to send messages, but far from the war. From that room in Lisbon, he began to create an illusion. He bought English newspapers and guidebooks. He studied them carefully, copying British expressions and slang. Then he began to send reports to the Germans. He claimed to have reached London. He described weather, rationing, troop morale, even the price of eggs. He invented a network of 27 sub-agents, each with a background and handwriting style of their own. There was a Welsh seaman, a Scottish airman, a typist in the Ministry of Information, a soldier stationed near Dover. He wrote about them as if they were real people, with emotions, fatigue, and mistakes. The Abwehr believed every word. They paid him, praised him, and gave him the code name Arabelle. British intelligence soon intercepted his radio traffic. They were puzzled by the accuracy of some details, though the reports themselves made little sense. It was clear someone was feeding the Germans from inside Britain, yet many of the locations he described did not exist. In 1942, MI5 identified the source. They traced the messages to Lisbon and discovered Juan Pujol García. Instead of exposing him, the British made a decision that would change the war. They brought him secretly to London. Under the 20 Committee, a branch of MI5 that managed double agents, he was officially turned. Arabelle became Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, for his skill and performance. London, 1943. The war had reached a turning point. The Allies were planning the invasion of Nazi-occupied France, Operation Overlord. To succeed, they needed to deceive Hitler about where and when the attack would occur. That deception would be known as Operation Bodyguard. Garbo's network was ideal for it. Over the next year, he and his British handler, Thomas Harris, transformed fiction into strategy. Garbo's imaginary agents supplied Berlin with a steady stream of information, part true, part false, all designed to strengthen the illusion that the invasion would come not in Normandy but in the Pas de Calais. His letters were written by hand, several pages long, filled with routine detail and subtle credibility. He complained about slow mail service, uncooperative sub-agents, and long nights. He even described trivial matters like shortages of petrol or gossip from soldiers. The Germans accepted every report as authentic. By early 1944, Garbo was one of Germany's most trusted spies. He sent more than 300 messages, all vetted by MI5 before transmission. His information was often verified by other controlled double agents, creating a closed loop of deception. Then came the drawing. To reinforce the Calais illusion, MI5 asked Garbo to provide visual evidence, something tangible that the Abwehr could show to its analysts. Garbo sat in his London flat and took a sheet of paper. He drew a map in pencil. It was rough and uneven, an outline of the English coast with arrows and dots. He marked supposed supply depots, airfields, and headquarters near Dover. He added arrows pointing across the channel toward Calais. He labeled them carefully in his neat, deliberate hand. It looked amateurish, almost childish, but that was the point. Real documents from the field often looked careless, rushed, and smudged. The imperfection made it believable. Garbo sent the drawing as if it had been prepared by one of his fictional agents, a railway clerk who claimed to have seen secret transport schedules. When the map reached the Abwehr, it caused excitement. Analysts compared it to other intercepted rumors and found it consistent. They classified it as high-grade intelligence. Copies were distributed to senior German commanders and to the intelligence division of the High Command. The silly drawing, as MI5 later called it, became physical, proof that the main Allied attack would target Calais. In the spring of 1944, Garbo's deception entered its most critical phase. He sent messages describing imaginary troop movements near Dover. He reported that General Patton commanded a huge 1st U.S. Army group ready to cross the Channel. In reality, this army existed only in photographs and radio chatter, a phantom force built by Allied deception teams. Berlin believed completely. They ordered new fortifications around Calais. They reinforced the area with artillery and armored divisions. They reduced forces in Normandy. Garbo had succeeded beyond expectation. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Allied ships crossed the Channel under heavy fire. Paratroopers landed in Normandy in the darkness before dawn. The largest amphibious operation in history had begun. That morning, Garbo sent another message to Berlin. He told them that his agents confirmed the landings in Normandy, but insisted it was only a diversion. He wrote that the main assault would follow at Calais within days. The Abwehr believed him again. They forwarded his message to the Führer's headquarters. Hitler ordered his armored divisions to remain in Calais, waiting for an attack that would never come. For 7 weeks after D-Day, the German High Command held its best forces in reserve. By the time they realized the truth, the Allies had already broken out from Normandy and liberated Paris. Historians would later call Garbo's operation the single greatest deception of the Second World War. Through words and imagination, he had altered the movements of entire armies. Berlin never suspected. They continued to trust Garbo completely. In July 1944, they awarded him the Iron Cross Second Class on Hitler's personal approval, an extraordinary honor for a non-German civilian. The British, amused by the irony, later decorated him with the Member of the Order of the British Empire. He was the only man in the war to be honored by both sides. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, Garbo's mission ended. His letters had helped secure Allied victory, yet his name remained secret. The British classified all records of his activities. He was thanked quietly and given a modest stipend. Then he disappeared. He moved to Venezuela under a false identity arranged by MI5. In official records, he was listed as dead. Died of malaria in Angola. For nearly 40 years, the world believed that Juan Pujol García was gone. The truth emerged in 1984. A British historian named Nigel West discovered that Garbo was alive in Caracas, living quietly as a bookseller. When found, the old man smiled and said simply, "Yes, I was Garbo." He was 72 years old. He said he had lived in peace and wanted no fame. He still had the medal the Germans sent him, a reminder of a war fought entirely in the shadows. He died in 1988. The files released later confirmed the full scope of his work. More than 300 reports, 27 imaginary agents, and one silly drawing that fooled the most dangerous dictator in modern history. His deception delayed German reinforcements by critical weeks and saved countless lives. It became a textbook example for every intelligence service that followed. In retrospect, Garbo's success rested on a simple principle. He gave the enemy not what they feared, but what they expected. He did not challenge their worldview. He confirmed it, and in doing so, he trapped them inside their own assumptions. That was why his lie worked, because it sounded familiar, because it felt true. The story of Juan Pujol García stands today as one of the most remarkable chapters in intelligence history. A man with no training, no army, and no weapon, used only words and a pencil to change the direction of a world war. His silly drawing remains preserved in the British National Archives. A faint pencil sketch that once deceived an empire. Its lines are faded now, but their impact endures. After D-Day, London's intelligence offices remained tense. The deception had worked, but no one dared to relax. For weeks, Garbo continued to transmit messages to Berlin, insisting that Normandy was a feint, and that the main assault would come at Calais once the first phase was complete. In Berlin, the Abwehr believed him entirely. The messages were circulated through the German High Command. Reports from Garbo's imaginary agents confirmed that fresh divisions were preparing near Dover. The false army he had invented on paper months before now lived vividly in the enemy's imagination. Hitler trusted his intelligence services. He believed that his officers understood the enemy. He could not imagine that the most detailed source of information he possessed was being controlled by Britain itself. And so he waited. He ordered the panzer divisions near Calais to hold position. He refused repeated requests from his generals to move them toward Normandy. He was certain, absolutely certain, that Garbo's information was correct. That certainty cost him France. The Allied command watched the intercepts with amazement. Every decoded message from Berlin confirmed that the deception remained intact. For more than a month, the Germans treated Normandy as a distraction. Only after July, when Allied forces were already pushing inland, did they begin to shift their reserves. By then, it was too late. Paris was liberated in August 1944. The Western Front had collapsed. Garbo's network, an empire of fiction, had achieved one of the most decisive strategic effects in modern warfare. When Allied troops entered liberated France, few of them ever knew that a single man's handwriting had protected their landing. The details remained classified. Garbo continued to live quietly in London under MI5 supervision. His case officers considered him reliable, disciplined, and almost obsessively cautious. He double-checked every report, rehearsed every detail of his invented sub-agents' lives. He treated deception as science. The British admired his patience. Some officers even called him the perfect double agent. Yet the work had taken a toll. Garbo was exhausted. He suffered from insomnia and tension headaches. He rarely spoke about emotion, but he once told his handler, "Each lie I write may save a life or end one." He understood the weight of his deception. Each false report that delayed German troops meant Allied soldiers might live through the night. Each successful illusion carried consequences measured in thousands. In May 1945, when Germany surrendered, Garbo's duty ended. MI5 officially closed the double cross system that had controlled dozens of German spies. Many were imprisoned or repatriated. Garbo was different. He had been a volunteer, not a conscript. His motives had been moral, not monetary. He asked for nothing, no reward, no publicity. He simply said he wished to disappear. The British agreed. They provided him with a modest sum of money, a new passport, and arranged for him to leave Europe under a false identity. In official records, he was declared dead, malaria in Angola, 1949. The truth was known only to a handful of officers. He settled in Venezuela. He opened a small shop. He lived quietly under his new name. To his neighbors, he was an ordinary man with a faint Spanish accent. He married again and had a family. He avoided politics, rarely mentioned the war. For almost 40 years, the world forgot him. Even among intelligence historians, Garbo was a rumor, a code name without a face. During those same decades, the methods he pioneered evolved into doctrine. The double cross system became a foundation for post-war counter-espionage. The principle was simple. If you can capture an enemy spy, don't eliminate them. Use them. Turn them into a channel for controlled misinformation. The British had done this with extraordinary success during the war. Garbo was their finest example. His case demonstrated that loyalty, even feigned, could be manufactured through discipline, detail, and trust. Intelligence officers studied his letters as textbooks. They noted how each message blended fact with fiction, how he maintained consistency among his 27 imaginary agents, and how he used small, mundane details, missed trains, ration shortages, to make grand lies believable. It was deception built on realism. The Germans trusted him not because he was dramatic, but because he was ordinary. That was his genius. The Abwehr never discovered the truth. Even after the war, surviving officers believed that Garbo had been loyal. In interrogations after Germany's defeat, several of them described him as our best man in London. They never realized that every letter, every drawing, had passed through MI5's hands before reaching them. In July 1944, months before the war's end, Berlin had awarded Garbo the Iron Cross Second Class. The recommendation was signed personally by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr. The irony was immense. A Spanish volunteer working for Britain, decorated by Nazi Germany for his loyalty to Hitler. MI5 allowed him to accept the medal through diplomatic channels. They even kept the correspondence in his file. Decades later, the medal itself was found in his belongings in Caracas, tarnished but intact. The British recognized his contribution privately. King George VI approved his appointment as a member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE. The citation simply read, "For valuable services in connection with operations of special importance." No further details were released. To the public, the name Juan Pujol García remained unknown. In 1984, the truth resurfaced. Nigel West, a British historian researching wartime deception, traced records through the newly opened archives. He discovered inconsistencies in the file of Agent Garbo. The death certificate listed Angola, but no corroborating record existed. West followed the trail through Spain to South America. In Caracas, he found an elderly man running a small gift shop. The man listened quietly as West explained his search. Then he smiled. "Yes," he said softly, "I was Garbo." For West, it was an extraordinary revelation. The man whom history thought dead had lived quietly for decades, reading newspapers, watching the world move on. Garbo told his story modestly. He said he had acted out of conscience, nothing more. He had wanted to atone for what he saw as Europe's betrayal of itself. He expressed no bitterness toward MI5 or the Germans. He said only that war had shown him how easy it is to make men believe what they wish to believe. The interviews between Garbo and Nigel West were recorded and later published. They provided historians with details that had never appeared in official reports: how Garbo invented his sub-agents' personalities, how he managed correspondence, and how the silly drawing had been created late one night in early 1944. He said the drawing had been meant only as supporting evidence, a sketch to make his letter more convincing. He never imagined it would reach Hitler himself. When West showed him a copy of the document from the archives, Garbo laughed softly. "It is a poor drawing," he said, "but perhaps a poor drawing was exactly what they needed." Garbo's rediscovery in the 1980s renewed public interest in wartime deception. Documentaries were produced. Historians re-evaluated Operation Bodyguard and its impact. The British government confirmed the accuracy of West's findings. MI5 released declassified files showing how Garbo's network had transmitted over 300 messages between 1942 and 1945. The full correspondence filled thousands of pages. The silly drawing, still preserved in the National Archives under reference KV 24196, remains one of the most remarkable artifacts of the Second World War. When Garbo died in 1988, he was 76. His funeral in Caracas was attended by family and a few diplomats. No fanfare, no ceremony, just quiet recognition for a man who had once deceived the Third Reich. Later that year, British intelligence released a final note to his file. It read simply, "Agent Garbo, deceased, service exceptional, Operation Fortitude successful." In reviewing Garbo's legacy, historians emphasize that his success depended not only on creativity, but on structure. Every report followed a strict method: factual core, fabricated expansion, emotional realism. His lies were believable because they felt routine. He followed a schedule. He wrote letters as though from multiple agents, each with consistent handwriting and narrative style. He mailed them through Portugal to maintain the illusion of distance. The British controlled every step. They censored, timed, and decoded each message before allowing it to reach Berlin. It was deception as disciplined as any military operation. The Abwehr's collapse after 1945 revealed how thoroughly it had been penetrated. Most of its agents in Britain were in fact double agents managed by MI5. Yet none matched Garbo's scale. He had not only deceived the Germans, he had shaped their overall strategic thinking. General Alfred Jodl, chief of operations for the German High Command, later admitted at Nuremberg that the expected Calais invasion was based on credible intelligence sources. Those sources were Garbo's reports. By the war's end, Garbo's fictional network had been so convincing that Berlin allocated rations and funds for his imaginary subagents. They even sent him bonuses for work well done. Garbo forwarded some of the money to MI5 as evidence. The British laughed quietly. The enemy was financing its own deception. After decades of secrecy, Garbo's file stands today as one of the most complete records of wartime counterintelligence. Every letter, codebook, and map survives in the archives. Historians have examined the faded pencil lines of the drawing that once dictated Hitler's strategy. It remains simple: a coastline, some arrows, a few annotations. Yet those lines delayed divisions, redirected artillery, and changed the timetable of the war. Garbo's career demonstrates how war is not only fought with weapons, but with perception. The victory at Normandy owed as much to deception as to courage on the beaches. And deception, in turn, owed everything to a quiet man who believed that imagination could serve truth. He once wrote in a private note found after his death, "If lies can protect the innocent, then perhaps they are not lies at all." It was not philosophy, it was his justification, the moral framework of a man who lied to save lives. Today, intelligence officers study his case not as legend, but as instruction. Every new recruit to British counterintelligence learns the name Juan Pujol García. They study his correspondence, his structure of reporting, and his understanding of human belief. They call it the Garbo pattern. The story of Garbo's silly drawing remains a reminder that even in an age of vast technology and complex war, the most powerful weapon is still the human mind, its capacity to imagine, to persuade, and to believe. And in that capacity, Juan Pujol García stood unmatched. After 1945, the world entered a new kind of conflict. The Second World War had ended, but secrecy did not. Allied nations founded new agencies, expanded surveillance, and formalized the craft of deception. The work that men like Garbo had performed in wartime would now shape the peacetime intelligence order. In Britain, the lessons of the double cross system became doctrine. At MI5's training schools, instructors explained how every captured spy could become a potential channel of misinformation. They called this the controlled agent principle. Garbo's reports served as the central case study. Students read his files line by line. They saw how small truths concealed larger falsehoods, how each letter balanced plausibility with ambiguity. The method was methodical rather than instinctive. Garbo had turned deception into a discipline. At the same time, Germany's surviving intelligence officers faced interrogation. Many insisted that Garbo had been genuine. They could not accept that the source who had guided them for years was false. To them, it seemed impossible that so many details, the weather in Dover, the troop names, the daily gossip, could have been fabricated. When British investigators revealed the truth, some refused to believe it even then. They said there must have been two Arabelles, one real, one British invention. There was not. There had been only one, Juan Pujol García. The Cold War magnified the importance of his legacy. Intelligence became a permanent instrument of state power. From Washington to Moscow, both blocs studied wartime deception for guidance. Reports circulated through NATO and CIA archives summarizing Garbo's techniques: credible detail, layered agents, delayed corrections, and above all, emotional realism. He had proven that people trust information that feels human. Statistics or numbers could be doubted. A tired railway clerk complaining about rations could not. It was this realism, mundane, consistent, plausible, that defined what later officers called strategic narrative control. Modern counter-espionage owes much to that discovery. Inside the British services, Garbo's operation remained classified until the late 1970s. Even after the public learned of Operation Fortitude, few knew the man behind it. His case file was labeled Most Secret, Personal. Access required approval from the Director General of MI5. Researchers who finally opened it described the papers as extraordinary. Hundreds of handwritten pages, coded radiograms, and sketches of fictitious supply lines. Among them lay the original drawing, the simple pencil map that had once reached Hitler's headquarters. The file included German translations stamped by the Abwehr and the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. They bore comments in blue pencil, reliable, confirmed by other sources. That note, written by an officer in 1944, had been decisive in freezing German troop movements. To appreciate the magnitude of that single error, military historians later reconstructed the timeline. If the Panzer Division stationed near Calais had moved south within the first week after D-Day, they could have reached Normandy by June 10th. They might have driven the Allies back to the beaches. Instead, they waited until July 12th, more than a month too late. That delay was the product of Garbo's illusion, not bombs, not armies, but letters and a drawing. Garbo's success also depended on Britain's infrastructure for deception. Behind him stood codebreakers at Bletchley Park, analysts of the London Controlling Section, and officers of the 20 Committee who coordinated every false story. The system functioned like a vast theater. Garbo was its lead actor. Others handled sets, lighting, and script continuity. Each piece of misinformation was cross-checked with actual military operations. If real ships departed Liverpool, Garbo could safely report that a convoy had been sighted. When weather delayed Allied movement, his letters mentioned unfavorable tides. Such synchronization made fiction indistinguishable from fact. The precision impressed even his British superiors. Colonel John Masterman, head of the 20 Committee, later wrote, "Our agents were believable because they were consistent." Garbo's consistency was absolute. After the war, that discipline became a model for what intelligence officers called plausible deception. It rested on three principles: continuity, verification, and imperfection. Continuity ensured that each message fitted within a coherent narrative. Verification required that at least part of each report could be confirmed by the enemy through observation. Imperfection gave authenticity, the small errors and delays that make a human voice believable. Garbo embodied all three. His silly drawing was imperfect enough to appear real. Its errors became its proof. The rediscovery of Garbo in the 1980s coincided with the declassification of Allied deception archives. Historians compared his correspondence with intercepted German cables preserved in American and British repositories. The correlation was exact. On the morning of 6th of June 1944, Garbo's radio message had been decrypted by British codebreakers within minutes of transmission to Berlin. MI5's note in the margin read, "Message sent per plan Fortitude. Enemy acceptance confirmed via Enigma intercept." This meant that within hours of D-Day, London knew that Berlin believed the invasion at Normandy was a feint. That single confirmation convinced Allied commanders to maintain the deception for weeks. Garbo's reappearance brought him brief recognition. In 1984, he was invited to London as a guest of the British government. At a small ceremony, officials from MI5 and the Ministry of Defense thanked him privately. He visited the Imperial War Museum and viewed the D-Day exhibit. When shown a copy of the fake map, he studied it for a long moment and said, quietly, "I remember drawing this. I never thought it would survive." He met several of the surviving officers who had supervised him. Most were old men by then, but they remembered his precision and calm. One described him as the most reliable liar we ever had. In Spain and Latin America, journalists began publishing his story. They portrayed him as a hero of both sides, a Spaniard who had served Britain while deceiving Germany. For Spain, still emerging from dictatorship, he became a symbol of moral courage. Garbo himself rejected the label of hero. He told interviewers, "I did what anyone should do when faced with evil. I fought with the tools I had." He remained modest, almost detached. He said the real credit belonged to the soldiers who landed in Normandy. He had merely kept the enemy looking the other way. In the archives, his correspondence revealed another side of his character. meticulous, methodical, even obsessive. He cataloged every letter he wrote, noting date, code, and transmission path. He cross-referenced previous statements to avoid contradiction. His imaginary agents had birthdays, families, even illnesses. One of them, a sailor named Fred Harris, was said to have drowned in a bombing raid. Garbo sent Berlin a condolence letter for Harris's widow. The Germans replied with sympathy and an additional payment for the loss. It was bureaucracy believing its own paperwork. The moral dimension of Garbo's deception has long fascinated scholars. Was it ethical to lie on such a scale even for a just cause? Philosophers of war often cite him as an example of consequentialist ethics in intelligence. The idea that deception may be moral if it prevents greater harm. Contemporaries like Winston Churchill accepted that reasoning. Churchill famously said, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." Garbo was one of those bodyguards. From a technical perspective, the success of Operation Fortitude owed much to the synchronization of Garbo's messages with physical evidence. Inflatable tanks near Dover, dummy radio traffic, and counterfeit headquarters signage all reinforced his letters. Yet without him, the deception lacked a believable human anchor. Machines and props can be faked. Conviction cannot. Garbo gave the illusion a voice, a steady, rational tone that German analysts came to rely on. His restraint was crucial. He never exaggerated, never shouted urgency. His reports read like those of a cautious civil servant, and that reliability was irresistible. After his death in 1988, MI5 declassified most of his file. Researchers confirmed that between 1942 and 1945, he and his British handlers had transmitted 315 letters and 105 radio messages totaling more than 500,000 words. All were approved by the 20 Committee. The files also contained receipts from the Abwehr, payments totaling over $30,000, a substantial sum in wartime currency. Garbo had turned the enemy's money against them. The German side of the correspondence survives as well, preserved in the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg. Reading them together, the original English drafts and their German translations, reveals the precision of MI5's work. The translators rendered even Garbo's stylistic quirks faithfully, maintaining his tone of polite understatement. In one memo dated 15th of June 1944, a German colonel wrote, "Agent Arabel reports that the enemy's preparations near Dover continue. Reliability of source remains high. Advise maintaining Panzergruppe West at present positions." That single instruction, issued on the basis of Garbo's falsehood, ensured that thousands of German soldiers remained idle while Allied troops advanced. In the years that followed, intelligence officers from multiple nations visited the British archives to study the Garbo case. The Americans integrated its lessons into their Cold War deception planning, including operations during the Korean and Vietnam conflicts. The Soviets, through captured German files, learned of Garbo's role and respected it. One KGB analyst reportedly called him the magician of London. Thus, a single man's wartime craft influenced both sides of the next global confrontation. But perhaps the most enduring legacy lies not in espionage, but in understanding psychology. Garbo demonstrated that belief depends less on evidence than on narrative. The Germans had evidence, reconnaissance photos, radio intercepts, weather data, but they interpreted all of it through the story Garbo told them. They saw what they expected to see. That cognitive bias, confirmation, has since been recognized as central to intelligence failures. Garbo's deception remains the textbook example. To the end of his life, he described his work not as brilliance, but as discipline. He said he had no special gift. He simply understood people's need for certainty. He gave them certainty, and they mistook it for truth. He once said in one of his final interviews, "They wanted to believe me. I only gave them permission." By the early 21st century, with most wartime participants gone, Garbo's story had become part of public history. Museums displayed his photograph beside the words, "The man who fooled Hitler." Visitors read the story of the silly drawing and were astonished that such a crude sketch could change the war. Yet historians emphasize that the drawing alone meant little. Its power came from context, from the network of lies that surrounded it. Without Garbo's prior credibility, a rough pencil map would have been ignored. Because of his reliability, it became proof. That is how deception truly works, not through brilliance, but through patience. The drawing itself remains in a controlled archive environment, stored flat under glass, protected from light. Its pencil lines, faint but legible, run across yellowed paper. The British National Archives catalog entry reads, "Sketch map forwarded by Double Agent Garbo, March 1944. It is classified as evidence of strategic deception, Operation Fortitude South." Beside it rests the typed transcript of the German translation, with annotations from the Abwehr intelligence officer who authenticated it. He underlined the arrow toward Calais and wrote, "Consistent with previous reports. Recommend dissemination." That underline, drawn 80 years ago, remains visible today. Garbo never returned to Europe permanently. He visited Spain once in the 1980s, but declined all public appearances thereafter. He preferred quiet anonymity in Venezuela. He read history books and listened to shortwave radio. Friends said he remained thoughtful, reserved, always punctual. He avoided discussing the war. When asked what he had learned, he answered, "That imagination, when disciplined, can defend freedom." He was right. For all the complexity of modern intelligence, his lesson endures. Control the imagination, and you control the battlefield. Garbo controlled it not with fear, but with detail. And through detail, he reshaped history. In military archives, analysts still refer to the deception that supported D-Day as Operation Fortitude South. Its success remains unmatched in the history of strategic warfare. When historians chart the decisions that shaped 1944, they find one constant thread: the reliability of a single agent known only by a code name, Garbo. That reliability had been built slowly over years of disciplined fabrication. It was not luck. It was process, an understanding of how trust is constructed and maintained under scrutiny. The German intelligence system of the time was fragmented. The Abwehr, the Sicherheitsdienst, and the OKW intelligence division often competed rather than cooperated. Information that confirmed existing assumptions was valued most. Contradictory reports were ignored. Garbo's messages fit perfectly within that environment. They were detailed, calm, and, most important, consistent with Hitler's expectations. The result was what modern analysts call a confirmation trap. German officers saw in Garbo's letters precisely what they wanted to see. Their own organizational bias amplified the deception. Allied intelligence exploited this with precision. Each message sent through Garbo's network was timed to coincide with observable events: convoy departures, weather patterns, radio transmissions from dummy units. Every real occurrence created a shadow narrative that Garbo could describe. It was an ecosystem of lies sustained by fragments of truth. This method has since been studied under many names: perception management, active measures, strategic communication, but its origin traces back to the room in London where Garbo wrote. Within that small office, time was measured by the clatter of typewriter keys and the hum of radio transmitters. MI5 technicians maintained contact with the Abwehr through coded channels, while Garbo drafted his next letter longhand in Spanish, his handwriting precise and deliberate. Each draft was translated, edited, and transmitted. He rarely made a mistake. His supervisor, Thomas Harris, later described him as a man of extraordinary self-control. For 3 years, he lived within a fiction so deep that even his own wife in London believed he was a real intelligence officer commanding a network of agents. When the war ended, Harris wrote in his final report, "Pujol possesses 2 qualities rarely found together, imagination and obedience. He will invent endlessly, yet never deviate from instruction." That combination made him indispensable. He could improvise but never lose discipline. After 1988, as more records were released, researchers quantified the impact of his work. By comparing operational orders, they found that German panzer divisions remained immobile in the Calais region for 54 days after 6 June 1944. During that same period, Allied forces unloaded over 1 million tons of supplies through the Normandy beaches. No other single deception in the war produced such measurable strategic effect. Military academies now teach this as a case study in cognitive delay operations, the art of freezing an opponent's decision process long enough for reality to change beneath them. Garbo's life after the war stayed quiet. He never sought recognition, never lectured, never joined intelligence circles. When the press finally found him, he seemed surprised that anyone still cared. He said, "I was part of a machine. The machine won. That is enough." Yet, by then, his story had already entered legend. Documentaries and books retold it in multiple languages. His image, thin, bespectacled, expression thoughtful, became the face of deception done for a cause. In the years that followed, new generations of historians revisited his file not to celebrate espionage, but to understand its psychology. They noted that Garbo never relied on complex codes or devices. His greatest tool was empathy, the ability to think as his adversary thought. He could imagine the world through the eyes of an enemy analyst in Berlin. He anticipated what that analyst needed to believe, then provided it with meticulous detail. That human insight remains at the heart of intelligence work today. By the 1990s, universities studying propaganda and communication theory had begun citing Garbo's case as the earliest large-scale demonstration of narrative dominance. He had proven that if a story is coherent and repeated often enough, even contradictory evidence cannot dislodge it. The Germans received aerial photographs of Allied buildups in southern England that did not match his descriptions. Still, they trusted him. The narrative outweighed the data. To later observers, the silly drawing became a symbol of that principle. Its rough lines demonstrated that authority does not depend on perfection. A flawed artifact placed in a trusted framework carries more weight than a flawless one without context. That is why the map worked. It looked like something drawn quickly by a tired man doing his duty. It felt real. In reality, it was part of a planned illusion known internally as Fortitude South 2. Garbo's sketch, transmitted through diplomatic pouches and encoded messages, was one of several visual proofs prepared to sustain the Calais narrative. It was chosen precisely because it appeared informal. The drawing reached Hitler's headquarters in early April 1944. Records from the Führer Hauptquartier show that his staff referenced it during strategic discussions. Field Marshal von Rundstedt ordered further defenses in Calais based on those briefings. When Allied forces finally landed at Normandy, Rundstedt still waited for the main invasion. That delay, confirmed through intercepted communications, remains one of the most consequential intelligence outcomes of the war. The legacy of Garbo's deception extends beyond military history. In ethics courses for intelligence officers, his name arises in discussions about the boundaries of truth. Can deception serve morality? Where is the line between strategy and manipulation? Garbo's story forces those questions. He acted without hatred, without profit, driven only by a belief that fascism must be defeated. His lies protected lives. His deceit preserved freedom. For that reason, many scholars describe him not as a deceiver, but as a guardian of truth disguised in falsehood. The files of the 20 Committee close with one final note dated September 1945. It reads, Agent Garbo discharged from further service, reliability total, value beyond estimation. There are no more entries after that. The rest of his life unfolded outside the record. Today, visitors to the British National Archives can request his dossier. Archivists bring out a gray box labeled KV 24196, Juan Pujol García, Garbo. Inside are photographs, carbon copies, and that single drawing. The paper is thin, almost translucent. The pencil lines fade toward the edges. To most viewers, it seems unremarkable, but to those who know the story, it represents a turning point in world history. A drawing that moved armies, a lie that saved Europe. In 2019, when the document was digitized for preservation, curators recorded its dimensions: 27 centimeters by 21, graphite on bond paper. They listed its condition as stable. One archivist added an unofficial remark in the metadata field, evidence that imagination can alter reality. It was not analysis, it was recognition. Garbo's case remains part of the curriculum at military colleges in Britain, the United States, and Spain. Students examine how narrative coherence can outweigh tactical strength. They learn that deception is most effective when it uses the enemy's own logic. And they learn that sometimes the most powerful document is the simplest. Every year, when instructors display a reproduction of the map, they remind students that its creator was not a career spy, but an ordinary citizen moved by conscience. That fact resonates more than any operational detail. 8 decades later, historians still debate whether any single intelligence effort has ever produced such a decisive result. Most agree, none has. Garbo's deception altered the outcome of the largest amphibious assault in history and shortened the war in Europe. The statistics are tangible. German forces at Calais numbered more than 15 divisions, including armored units that could have crushed the Normandy beachhead. Their inaction cannot be explained by weather, logistics, or command delay. It was belief, engineered belief, that kept them there. When future generations read about the Second World War, they often encounter lists of battles and commanders. Garbo's name appears in smaller print, if at all. Yet, behind the pages of official history, his hand guided events as surely as any general. He fought with no weapon except intellect, and his victory came not in blood, but in understanding. Garbo's story ends where it began, with a man alone at a desk, a sheet of paper before him, and a pencil in his hand. He draws a line across the page, connecting points that exist only in his imagination. Outside, bombs fall and sirens wail. Inside, silence. He studies the line, adds an arrow, and writes one final note. Then he folds the paper, seals it, and sends it into history. That piece of paper travels across Europe, crosses desks, languages, and minds, until it reaches a dictator who sees in it what he already believes. And in that moment, when assumption meets illusion, the fate of nations shifts. That is how one man with a simple drawing fooled an empire.